A very good morning from wet and windy west of Ireland. You're very welcome to today's Signpost webinar. My name is Mark Gibson and the manager of the Teagasc Connected Programme. Wherever you're joining us from today, we hope that you're keeping safe and well during these extraordinary times. And today we're going to be discussing the Signpost Programme, which is a campaign to promote climate change and by all Irish farmers and achieve early progress in reducing gaseous emissions from Irish agriculture. And the person who's going to be leading this programme is Dr. Tom O'Dwyer from Teagasc, who joins us this morning to tell us what lies ahead. Tom, good morning to you.
Morning, Mark.
You're very welcome.
Thanks for the invitation
to the Signpost Programme. And also we're joined this morning by Professor Gerry Boyle, who's Director of Teagasc, and Professor Boyle is going to be giving us an update on a new initiative being launched by Teagasc today. And we're also joined by Pat Murphy, who's our Head of KT Environment Programme down in Johnstown Castle. Good morning. To you all. So Gerry, today's an interesting day for Teagasc, a launch of a new podcast today. Is that right?
Yes, yes, Mark. But it's also, of course, as you may be aware, the 45th program in this Signpost Farm series, and I did want to acknowledge that as well. And I think the attendances have been phenomenal, nearly 400 on average every week. So I want to say congrats to you, Yvonne, and all of the team. And if there was to be an Emmy award for something like this, it'd certainly be at the very top of the list. Yes, I just wanted to announce the launch of a new podcast on the environment, known as the Environment Edge. And clearly, as the title suggests, the podcast will be dealing with all of the environmental challenges that you've been covering in the Signpost Farm series over the last while. It's, I think, a hugely welcome addition to our series of podcasts. And it's very timely, given the focus clearly now on environmental issues within the sector, and particularly around climate change. I'm glad to say that the podcast, this new podcast, is the work of two very innovative ASAP advisors, Deirdre Glynn and Carl Summers, and their first podcast actually will be aired next Monday. And as it happens, I think it complements the topic of this morning's session very well. Also, Tom O'Dwyer, as you said, who's the manager of our new Signpost Farm programme, will be, I guess, giving it the first wider public area, you could say, that programme will have had. And of course, this is going to be the centrepiece of Teagasc's response to dealing with the environmental challenges that the sector faces, and that the sector, I think, is very willing to face up to also. So good luck, Tom, and make sure you tune in for that podcast also next Monday. Thanks, Mark, for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you, Gerry. And that podcast is now live on the Teagasc website. I had a look this morning and encourage everyone to sign up, whether through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or through the Teagasc website. So that is available now. So thank you very much, Gerry. And we're now going to move to the main agenda, which is our discussion on the Signpost Farm Programme. So Tom, you're very welcome to the programme today. This is a new role for you, Tom, is that right? You're formerly the head of our Dairy Knowledge Transfer Programme.
Right. Thank you for the invitation, Mark. I took up this role to lead up the Signpost Programme in November last year. So moved from my previous role of heading up the Dairy Knowledge Transfer team within Teagasc at that time.
Very good, very good. So you're going to give us an overview of what the plans are for the next number of years for the program. And just to remind everybody, if you have questions for Tom, please use the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen, and we'd be delighted to put those questions to Tom, or indeed the wider panel here as well. So Tom, we'll hand over to you, and we'll talk to you after your presentation.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Good morning, everybody. As has been previously mentioned, my name is Tom O'Dwyer, and I'm leading up the Signpost Programme. So my presentation this morning is going to outline the programme, and as the director said in his opening comments, the Signpost Programme is the Teagasc response to the challenge of climate change. So the overall objective of the Signpost Programme is to lead climate action by Irish farmers. So my presentation this morning will start with a number of slides setting the background or the context for the programme, before moving on to the Signpost Programme or proposal for the programme itself, and then moving in to look at 4 specific aspects of the Signpost Programme. So firstly, Signpost Farms, secondly, Signpost Advisory, then the Farm Sustainability Plan, and fourthly, the National Agricultural Soil Carbon Observatory. And I'll finish just with a summary slide on the progress we've made to date and what are our next steps. So to start with the background, our planet is getting warmer. So what this graph shows is the trend in global mean temperatures from the start of the Industrial Revolution in 1850 up to today, 2020. And you have a number of different data sources on the graph, but all the lines on the graph are following the same trend. So you see from the start of the Industrial Revolution in 1850, you see little enough change in temperature, some spikes here and there, but very marginal change in temperature up to, I suppose, the period there between the 2 world wars. And then there was an increase so that, in 1950s, we were about 0.4 of degrees Celsius above where we were in 1850. But then you had this rapid increase in global mean temperatures from the 1960s onwards, such that today in 2020, it's estimated that global mean temperatures are 1.2 degrees above where the temperatures were back in 1850. Interestingly, I think if you talk to Met Éireann, they will confirm that in Ireland, the temperature is approximately 1 degree Celsius above where it was in 1890. So the trend in temperatures in Ireland is much the same as observed globally. And the second point in relation to Ireland, if you talk to Met Éireann, they will say that today's climate, the climate that you and I are experiencing today, is different to the climate experienced by our ancestors in the last part of the 1800s. But we consider today's climate normal, and that normal is a different normal to the climate that was experienced back in the 1890s and the 1900s. And then if we move on to look at some of the climate-related events of 2020, and you see here if you remember, we had bushfires in Australia in the early part of 2020. We had forest fires in the western part of the United States in autumn 2020. Our own storm Kira in February 2020 features on the top 10 climate events of 2020. You may remember that there was reports of locust swarms in parts of Africa in 2020. We had Typhoon Amphan in early 2020. This then in the autumn is the hurricane season, an image of the hurricane season, and you have all the hurricanes queuing up to hit landfall in Central America and the southern states of the United States of America. And it was a record year for hurricanes last year. We had flooding in China. So I suppose the point I'm making here is that we are seeing an increasing number of extreme weather events all across the globe. And in some respects, perhaps these extreme weather events are being normalized, and we're saying, yeah, look, it's another forest fire, or it's another set of hurricanes. So, are we beginning to accept these as the new normal? But these events all come at a huge cost, in the billions of dollars, not to mention, in some cases, loss of life. In Ireland then, what are we seeing over the last number of years? I've got a couple of images on this graph. So on the top left, you have a graph showing the trend in our greenhouse gas emissions. And greenhouse gas emissions are obviously linked to climate change. And you can see here that the graph shows a downward trend in greenhouse gas emissions up to the early part of the last decade. And then it turned and has been on the increase since. And the projections here out to 2030 are for varying levels of increase in greenhouse gas emissions above where we were in 2015. And those future projections are influenced largely by the trend in the national herd. And the red bar here on the graph is the target as set out in the Climate Action Plan of 2019 for agricultural emissions in 2030. And it's below all these future projections. Now, those projections here that are on the graph are without mitigation. So in the absence of changing our farm practices, our greenhouse gas emissions are going to exceed our Climate Action Plan target. But the good news is that we have some tools in the toolbox. We have identified mitigation measures. We can reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And the challenge now is to make sure that those changes are implemented at farm level so that we can change the trajectory of this path here. Another graph here on ammonia emissions, which is not a greenhouse gas, but is an air pollutant. We can see there was a downward trend. Again, it has turned and is on the increase. And these are our targets here. And it's likely that we are going to exceed our targets unless, again, we start to change practices at farm level. On the water quality front, we've seen a loss in the number of high quality water bodies over the last 30 years. And I get this is a worrying trend and a trend that we need to address and reverse. And finally, then in the biodiversity area, we've seen a loss of biodiversity over the last 30 to 40 years. Looking to the future then, I've just got two slides looking to the future, and what kind of a climate could our farmers be farming with in the future. So this is a publication from the EPA and lots of data and lots of maps and predictions. I just picked out a small number here for these two slides. So looking to the future in terms of mean temperature, the prediction from this report is that mean temperature could increase by between 1 degree and 1.6 degrees by the middle part of this decade, by that 2040 to 2060 period. So, and the highest temperature increases will be on the east of the country. It's also predicting that we're likely to have a longer growing season and also an earlier start to the growing season. And we're like to have a longer grazing season. Our grazing season could be 12 to 55 days longer. So, at first glance, you'd say, I'll take some of that. I wouldn't mind slightly warmer temperatures and a longer growing and grazing season. That could work. But then you look at some of the other graphs that are in the document. And I've just picked out two here. You look at the projected changes in wet days and very wet days. Now, I think we all have our own definition of what a wet day is and what a very wet day is. And we could probably spend a good part of this broadcast this morning debating that. But in this publication, the definition of a wet day is a day in which there's 20 millimeters of rain in the day in 24 hours. And a very wet day is a day in which there's 30 millimeters of rain in the 24-hour period. And just focusing in on the image here on the right and on the dark blue colors here in this image. And what that's suggesting is that there could be a 30 to 40% increase in the number of very wet days by the middle of the next decade because of climate change. And down on this bottom lower graph, it's showing that there could be up to 47% increase in the number of dry periods during the summer. So there could be half as many, again, dry periods as we're currently experiencing by the middle of the next decade because of climate change. Now, so when you look at this report and you look at it from an agricultural perspective, the report suggests that a warming climate may present some positive opportunities for farming. Nevertheless, because of the changes in climate, we're likely to see an increase in pests forests that are currently not present in Ireland. And there's also going to be an increased frequency of droughts and heavy rainfall events. And both of those, or three of those, could be very detrimental to the potential gains of a warming climate to the agricultural sector in Ireland. And what we also have to bear in mind is that the climate is going to affect more than agricultural production in Ireland. It's also going to affect our towns, our villages, our coastal communities, and it's going to put pressure on our infrastructure. So climate is going to impact on the entire Irish economy, including agriculture. And we have to consider that when we're making choices in terms of our farm practices. So our actions over the last number of years are affecting our climate currently, and will continue to affect the climate in the future. But our actions of today can influence our future climate. So we need to be cognizant of that as well. And I think this is reflected in the emerging policy environment. And you know, we've seen recently the publication of the European Green Deal and the associated then farm to fork and biodiversity strategy. And quite clearly, they're trying to change the policy environment. So to send very clear and strong policy signals to farmers in terms of the type of farming that is preferred for the future. So we've seen the launch of the European Green Deal. And as I said, the farm to fork strategy and the biodiversity strategy. And the European Green Deal has set a very ambitious agenda in terms of climate neutrality. And it set the ambition of the European Union being a climate neutral economy by 2050. And those targets and ambitions have been picked up in our own climate action plan of 2019. And the Climatise document published by the Departments of Environment and Department of Agriculture just before Christmas. And I listened to Dale Crammond presenting about Climatise on an earlier edition of the Signpost webinar back in January. So the roadmap, the way forward is clearly laid out in my mind. And I suppose that's probably one of the reasons for the genesis of the Teagasc Signpost Programme. So there's all of these policy documents are showing a clear need to rebalance the focus between expansion, intensification, competitiveness and efficiency, and sustainability and environmental focus. So that's what these policy documents are focusing on. So moving on then to the Signpost Programme itself. So the proposal from Teagasc is to launch a national campaign to lead climate action, achieving early progress in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And at the centre of the Signpost Programme will be a core of 100 demonstration farms, which we will work with to bring about change on those farms, and so that those farms will be the early adopters of the technologies to reduce emissions, and that they in turn then can act as signposts for the wider farming population. They will also be central to a wider signpost advisory campaign, and finally then just a guiding principle for the Signpost Programme that's been adopted by Teagasc is that we want to align all of the agriculture industry around this programme. And it's not just a programme for dairy farmers or dairy processors, or indeed just for beef farmers and beef processors. It's for all of the agricultural sector in Ireland, because the challenge is immense and we all need to get around this initiative. And secondly, then we want to build on existing initiatives and relationships and collaborations while avoiding duplication. So we're not looking to reinvent the wheel, so to speak. We want to build on what's already there and add value by focusing existing efforts on the campaign to reduce emissions from agriculture. And I suppose I mentioned previously that one of the reasons for the launch of the Signpost Programme by Teagasc is the publication of the Teagasc Greenhouse Gas Marginal Abatement Cost Curve. And this has been covered in earlier Signpost webinars. So what this piece of research has identified are the tools and technologies which can contribute to a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions from Irish agriculture. And this piece of research clearly identifies that while the technologies have been identified, that the challenge in the decade ahead is to ensure widespread and early uptake of the measures that are identified. That we can't wait for the end of this decade to get these measures into practice on Irish farms. We have to start work on enabling farmers to adopt these measures now. So visually then, what will the Signpost programme look like? At the centre will be a series of farms, which we're calling the Signpost farms. And these farms will engage with all farmers and all students, or all students and all farmers can engage with these Signpost farmers. For each of these Signpost farmers, we're going to create a farm sustainability plan, which will be agreed with the farmer, but which will set out a very clear roadmap for each farm, specific to each farm, for the practices that can be adopted to reduce their emissions, to improve water quality, and to improve biodiversity. We also, at the end of each year, then we'll benchmark progress through the generation of an annual sustainability report using our National Farm Survey methodology. These farms, these Signpost farms, will also participate in on-farm research. We will work with partners in the Signpost programme. So, we're currently engaging with milk and meat processors to invite them to become partners in the programme. And then in terms of broadening the message to the wider farming community, we're going to use a combination of digital and our more traditional means of communicating with farmers through on-farm events, discussion groups, and training. So the objectives then for the Signpost farms are to showcase science-based technologies which can reduce agricultural emissions while acting as hubs for the wider advisory campaign. And through our advisory campaign, we expect to mobilize all of our advisors, but also to work to upskill, empower, and enable private and industry advisors to work with farmers to bring about the change that's required to reduce emissions from agriculture. Just a couple of slides then on the demonstration farmers, the Signpost farmers themselves. So it's widely recognized that demonstration farmers have a major role to play in the application of scientific findings and of new technologies. And it's also recognized that demonstration farmers can spread those best practices and innovative farming approaches amongst their peers. So it's recognized that farmers learn from farmers. So what it'll mean to be a Signpost farmer, we want Signpost farmers to be champions for climate action. We want them to embrace and integrate science-based solutions, to farm smarter, to use fewer inputs, to use bio-based solutions to displace fossil fuels, to work in partnership with their farm support team, to innovate. We want them to try new things on their farms. And we also want them to share the possible to shape positive change amongst the wider community. And some of you may be familiar with the 20 by 20 campaign, which is running currently to promote female participation in sports. And their slogan is, if she can't see it, she can't be it. And, I want that to apply to our Signpost farmers. I want our Signpost farmers to be the change that we want to see on all farms, and to point the way forward to a better climate. So my final slide in the Signpost farms then, I apologize for this slide, Mark. There's a lot of text on it. But if we just focus maybe down along the left-hand side here, what are the types of targets we will be working with the Signpost farmers to achieve? Well, the top line target is we need to work with the farmers to reduce emissions from their farm in total. And one of the ways we can do that is to reduce emissions per kilo of product. So whether it's, in this case, on this slide for the dairy cow, per kilo of fat and protein milk, but I have a similar slide for beef, and it's per kilo of carcass. So we have to reduce emissions per kilo of product, but also at the farm level, per hectare, and nationally overall. And then how are we going to do that? Well, within Teagasc, we believe that if we focus on these items down along here, that we will go a long way towards reducing emissions. So if we can improve pasture productivity and stock the farm appropriately, if we can reduce fertilizer use and make more efficient use of applied fertilizer, but also more efficient use of slurry, if we can optimize our soil fertility, if we have adequate slurry storage and we spread and utilize our slurry appropriately, if we have an optimum replacement rate and we reduce concentrate crude protein percentage, particularly when animals are at grass, and if we can manage biodiversity. All of those things can help to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and help the climate if we adopt the technologies and the appropriate practices. So we will be working with signpost farmers in the first instance to achieve those targets, but ultimately we will be working with all farmers to move in the right direction. So we want to engage with all farmers, and sustainability, as the director said in his opening comments, will be a primary focus for our advisors and teachers going forward. We want to provide tailored advice to individual farmers because the advice for each farm will be different. We want to use a blended approach in using traditional and digital means of communications. And we will work in partnership with Boyle on the Signpost Programme. Boyle are going to be partners on the Signpost Programme, particularly in the area of communications and making sure that messages are aligned. The Farm Sustainability Plan I've mentioned before, and just very briefly, it's going to be a document which will be a communication tool between the advisor and farmer so that actions that are agreed can be recorded, and then progress on the delivery of those actions can be tracked over time. So that's the Farm Sustainability Plan. My second last slide then, the National Agricultural Soil Carbon Observatory. This is a new piece of a research project which is just about to kick off, led by Teagasc. And I suppose it's been set up to answer the question about the amount of carbon that's been stored in our soils and in our hedgerows. So there has been some research work done in this area leading to some figures, but there are still outstanding questions that need to be answered in terms of the amount of carbon stored on different soil types and under different management practices and management systems. So what this project is going to do is to use the network of signpost farms as the test sites, and it'll conduct a number of measurements on each farm, including deep soil sampling using equipment like this here, including LiDAR analysis of the hedgerows and trees on the farm. And the deep soil sampling will come up with an estimation for the carbon in the soil, and the hedgerow analysis will come up for an estimation of the carbon in the hedgerows and trees. And the final part of this project then will involve a number of carbon flux towers, which is this picture here in the bottom right of the slide. And that piece of equipment can take very detailed measurements of the air and atmosphere in the footprint of the tower. And the data from all three of those pieces of equipment can be combined to give an estimation of the amount of carbon that's been stored in our soils and in our hedgerows. So where we got to, what progress have we made to date, and what are our next steps? So we're currently working on confirming the partners for the programme, and we've had very positive engagement with milk and meat processors to date. We're also working on the identification and selection of our signpost demonstration farms across the country. I'm currently running a recruitment campaign to recruit some people to fill out the signpost team. We will commence data collection in the next number of months. 2021 is our baseline year, so we will start to collect data and build up a picture of where the signpost demonstration farms are starting from. We're currently working on the development of a farm sustainability plan. We have a prototype available, and we will be using that prototype in the initial period to work with our signpost farms, but we are developing a more robust farm sustainability plan, and we will start the rollout of signpost communications very shortly. So thank you very much for the opportunity to present and share the Signpost Programme with the details of the Signpost Programme with you this morning. My contact details are there on screen. I'd be happy to talk to anybody on a one-to-one basis afterwards. And we have a web page, the details for that on the screen as well. So Mark, thank you very much. I'll be happy to take questions.
Thank you, Tom. That was a really good run through the programme. Obviously early days, yes, and you're still scoping out aspects of the program, but I mean, you're making good progress there. We're having a few questions, Tom, in relation to the KPIs that you mentioned there, that were quite focused on the gaseous emissions side of things. Some people wondering about KPIs for water quality, and I suppose that could be extended beyond to the other kind of environmental parameters that we need to keep an eye on. Maybe you'd like to comment on that.
So yes, I suppose firstly to reassure people that the Signpost program is going to look at all elements of sustainability. So we see the Signpost program as adopting a holistic view of sustainability. So while the focus for the program and the program that the initiative or the genesis of the program traces its way back to the publication of the greenhouse gas marginal abatement cost curve and the need to bring about change in farming practices to reduce emissions. So the focus for the program is about reducing greenhouse gas emissions. We will also, through the program, address water quality, biodiversity issues, and also continue to focus on farm productivity and farm profitability, so economic sustainability. So we're taking a holistic view of sustainability is my first point. And the second point is that on the KPIs, you will have seen a target in there to reduce nitrogen fertilizer use. So we will be looking to make more efficient use of applied fertilizers and equally to reduce nitrogen fertilizer use on the Signpost farms in the first instance, but then across all farms as we broaden the program. So to me, that's it's not a measure of water quality per se, but my understanding is that if we can improve the efficiency of our nutrient use and also reduce the nutrient load, well, that will have a positive effect on water quality measures.
Okay, thanks, Tom. You showed some interesting maps there of future temperature changes and future weather patterns. And I think it's interesting from an Irish context, but I think it's even more interesting when you look at what's going to be happening across Europe and the impact on farming across Europe, the areas that are of irrigation and so on. I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities there for farming in Ireland over the coming years as a result of this change that's occurring across the world. So I suppose there's losses in one area, but also probably gains. And I know some people are talking about the potential of wine and vineyards maybe starting up in County Wexford. But no, it is. I think it's really important to talk about that adaptation part of the story, because up to now, I suppose we've been largely focused on the mitigation side, and I think in future webinars, I think we're going to take a closer look at that adaptation side. Is there going to be an adaptation aspect to the Signpost Farm program?
Yeah. I think the focus at the moment for me anyway is on mitigation, so to try and reduce emissions. And then, I think as time goes on, we are also going to have to focus on adaptation, so adapting systems. And, I think if we think back to 2018 and we had, a very wet spring then followed by a drought, we got through it. Just about, I suppose you could say. And I suppose what we want to what I want to be sure about is that in future we have systems, our management systems are such that we're better able to cope with those variations, those extremes. And I know following the drought of following 2018, Teagasc did some work on mitigating that weather or climate risk. And ultimately, it boiled down to having fodder reserves and feed reserves and not running on empty, so that, as you come to the end of March, that you're looking at the back wall of the silage pit. And that's fine. That can be fine for a lot of springs and a lot of years. But, in the extreme year, you do need that reserve. And, farmers probably know best, the old saying, old hay is old gold, and farmers would have left a pillar or a bench of the hay barn with hay at the end of the winter. And, that was a practice. And perhaps maybe we've lost a little bit of sight of that. So we need to think about managing the risk, Mark. And the clear indications are that our climate has changed, is going to continue to change, and we need to manage for the associated risks.
We have a couple of questions just in relation to farmers getting involved in a Signpost Farm program. Is there a route there at the moment, or how will you be going about selecting the farmers or the farms to be involved in the program?
Yeah, so during my presentation, I said we're building on what we have already, and we already have programs with various partners. So we have dairy programs with the milk processors. We have beef programs with we've had beef programs with the meat processors, and so currently what we're doing is we're working to extend those programs to incorporate Signpost. And under a number of those programs, there already was a demonstration farms, Mark. So I suppose in the first instance, we're looking to work with our partners to identify demonstration farms. So between Teagasc and our industry partner to identify and shortlist farmers. So that's the way we're going about it at the moment. I guess, look, if somebody feels strongly enough that they want to put their name forward or suggest somebody, they can contact me, and I'll certainly add their name to a short list for consideration. But we haven't gone with an open call. We're working through existing channels to identify farmers. Yeah. Okay.
Thanks, Tom. Pat, lots of questions coming through there.
And the other, I suppose I want to start with a question there. Is this is the plan for working with Teagasc clients only, or how will we extend it beyond the Teagasc client base, and in particular from an education and I suppose knowledge building or knowledge transfer perspective?
Okay, very, very good question. So I've mentioned in my previous answer that we work with milk and meat processor partners. I come from the dairy knowledge transfer background, so that's what I'm most familiar with. And I know that all of the dairy processors, for example, have advisors on the ground engaging with farmers, and they engage with all of their suppliers. So that's one route that we're going to explore through this program to ensure that the dairy advisors in the dairy cooperatives and the milk processors are attuned to the messages that are coming from the Signpost program. And not alone are they aware of the messages, but they're enabled and empowered to act on those messages and to advise farmers accordingly. And we will be offering training to those advisors through Teagasc Connect Ed, led up by Mark Gibson, your co-host there, Pat. So I'd expect that we'll be rolling out industry training programs starting later this year. So as I said, I'm recruiting I'm going through a recruitment process at the moment. I expect to have some additional people on the Signpost team in the near future. And once we have the Signpost team in place, we'll be looking at rolling out training and communications.
There's an interesting question there, alluding to your history in previous roles of focus on grazing and grazing management. Do you see implications for grazing management from the messaging coming from the Signpost program?
No, I don't. I think my answer is no. Good top quality grazing management will be important to reduce emissions. That's what Teagasc research work has shown. If we can increase the amount of grass grown with the same amount of fertilizer, well, that's an improvement in efficiency. And that grass then can displace some other feed, which typically has a higher emissions footprint. So, the more grass we can grow and utilize and stock the farm accordingly, in most cases, the better. Now, I have to be very conscious as well, of course, Pat, from a biodiversity point of view. We don't want to plough up and reseed high biodiverse pastures on farms that are, say, more moderately stocked. So we have to get that balance right. You asked me specifically about grazing management. So I don't think grazing management will change, but our grassland swards may change, Pat. So we're going to see a shift towards more mixed swards, whether that's grass and clover or multi-species swards. We're going to see a shift in that direction, I think, in the future. But the management, the actual management of those swards, I don't think it's going to change dramatically.
Okay, there's Tom, do you see any potential for Signpost sustainability data to be incorporated into existing sustainability schemes like the ESDAS, Origin Green, and I suppose working with Bord Bia then?
So yeah, so we're like Teagasc has a good working relationship with Bord Bia, and Bord Bia are going to be partners on the Signpost Programme. So I anticipate that there will be an alignment between the measures that we're tracking on the Signpost Programme and the measures that are recorded through the sustainability audit and ESDAS and SBLAS schemes. And in point of fact, from looking at what's already tracked and recorded by Bord Bia, there's very good alignment. I think we need to build on that, and we will work with Bord Bia to ensure that both messages from Teagasc and Bord Bia are aligned, and that any confusion is removed, and that farmers aren't getting different signals from different state agencies.
Just a point of clarification, Tom. I know during your presentation you referred to the farms largely being livestock farms, but I understand that the plan is to roll this out to a wider cohort of farmers. Is that right?
Yeah. Yes, we will have farms representing all enterprises in the final team of Signpost farms. So if I suggested livestock farms only, it was a slip. We will have some tillage farms, albeit their carbon, the emissions from tillage farms is significantly lower than from other enterprises, but yet no, they can reduce that level of emissions. So we will have tillage farms. I've already spoken to colleagues in Teagasc in pigs and forestry, so we will gradually start to identify farms that will act as demonstration farms for all enterprises, Mark. We're probably a little bit more advanced with certain enterprises, notably dairy. We're probably a little bit further down the track in terms of selection of farms, but the ambition is to have demonstration farms for all enterprises.
One of the questions, the recurring questions throughout this series, Tom, has been in relation to the national herd, how we can continue to expand the herd and reduce emissions at the same time. And look, we've had this discussion over and over, and I think it's very much it's a political decision that needs to be made. But do you have a view on this, and how the national herd, coming from the dairy background that you have come from as well, how is this going to reconcile come 2030?
Yeah, it's a very topical question, Mark, given the publication of the CSO livestock numbers for December 2020, just in the last number of days. So, and as you said, it is a policy or a political decision. If there's a decision taken to limit the national herd in any way, so that's not a decision that's down to Teagasc. Personally, I believe, and it's Teagasc's view, that there are technologies available which can mitigate or reduce emissions from the national herd. So I would be, and Teagasc would be, advocating for the opportunity to for those technologies to be adopted. and to have an impact on emissions before maybe any drastic decision will be taken in terms of the national herd. Now, I recognize, having said that, I recognize as well that time is short and getting shorter. You know, we don't have an infinite amount of time to start to mitigate emissions. So, you know, yeah, that's my view on it. The decision on the national herd will be political, and I would be, and Teagasc would be always advocating that there are technologies there that can reduce emissions, and we should be supporting the adoption of those mitigation strategies in the first instance as a priority.
Tom, a number of, I suppose, quick-fire questions. Will the carbon footprint be measured on products coming from the Signpost farms?
Yes, the plan is that the farms will be enrolled in a national farm survey, and as part of an annual sustainability report, a carbon footprint figure will be generated.
Will ammonia be included in sustainability plans?
Yes, we are also including ammonia, and most principally, I suppose, technologies to reduce ammonia in our engagement with farmers. Yeah.
Will any organic farmers be included?
Yes, we want to include organic farmers in our final panel of signpost farmers. So yeah, otherwise our panel of signpost farmers will not be representative of Irish farmers. So I don't know who sent in that question, but if that person wants to contact me to talk about that, I'd be happy to have that conversation.
Yeah, it's come from a couple of people, so if they would contact you, that's fine. Will you take on board social and economic sustainability as part of your sustainability measurement?
Yeah, again, if people want to have a look at the Teagasc National Farm Survey Sustainability Report, they'll see that the model that's reported on there is a holistic model for sustainability, including 4 elements. So the first is economic, the second is environmental, the third is social, and the fourth is innovation. So there are the metrics. They are the segments of sustainability that we will be looking at and reporting on. Under that, then under each of those headings, there's a number of key performance indicators. So yes, we will be reporting on social and what's the second? Economic. Yeah. And sorry, the other point to make. The other point to make on that, Pat, is that from time to time I get asked the question, you know, will farmers be paid for adopting these new technologies, or, you know, who's going to pay for the cost of adopting the technologies? So I guess what we want to try and show through the Signpost demonstration farms is that over time, as these demonstration farms adopt the technology, so take on protected urea, spread slurry using low emission slurry spreading, reduce fertilizer, improve their nutrient use efficiency, improve and manage and improve biodiversity. That hopefully what we're anticipating is that we will be able to pick up in their financial reports each year that in point of fact their profitability is maintained or even improved. And so that's why we are going to keep a very keen eye on economic sustainability, so that we can demonstrate that by changing farming practices, it's not actually costing the farmer, and in point of fact could be contributing to improved profitability.
A couple of questions in relation to the, I suppose, the economic benefit to, I suppose, processors and farmers in terms of us moving in this direction.
Well, to farmers, I think I've alluded. Sorry, to farmers, I think I've alluded to in my previous answer. I think a number of the technologies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions are known to actually either be cost neutral to the farmer or actually to reduce costs. So, you know, for example, the adoption of EBI is is deemed to be to add to profit and not to cost the farmer. That's one example. The switch to protected urea is a small cost to the farmer, a very small cost to the the farmer, whereas the adoption of low emission slurry spreading is a bigger cost to the farmer. And that's why we have TAMS grants for low emission slurry spreaders to try and reduce that cost of the adoption of the technology to the farmer. To the processor, I guess what I'm picking up as I talk to processors is that their customers, so the customers of Dairygold and Glanbia and Keepack and ABP and so on, the customers that are buying the products produced by the processors are putting increasing pressure on the processors to demonstrate that they are working with their suppliers to reduce the footprint of the product. So for a Dairygold selling butter or an Ornua selling butter to a customer, the question they're being asked is, what is the footprint of that kilo of butter and what are you doing to reduce it? So there is, from what I gather, talking to the processors, they're under pressure from their customers to show that they're reducing, to demonstrate and to validate that they're reducing the footprint of the product. So in some respects, you could take the view that the price of selling product onto the international market, and remember that we export 90% of our product, the price of selling market onto the international market is a move towards improved sustainability, and that we don't have a choice in the matter. So, yeah.
Questions in relation to how do you propose to deal with water quality issues in working with the Signpost farms?
So our proposal in that respect is to work with ASSEP. I've spoken with Noel Meehan, the ASSEP program manager, and we have reached an agreement that the ASSEP advisors can visit each of the demonstration farms, the Signpost demonstration farms, and conduct a full farmyard and farm assessment, identify the risks, and then put in place a plan with the farmer to reduce and eliminate those risks over a period of time. I believe also from talking to Noel that LawPro are also willing to come on board and help with water quality assessment in the local catchment. So that's our plans at the moment. We're not going to be taking a catchment approach. So we'll deal with the demonstration farmer, and we'll ensure that the demonstration farmer isn't adding to the burden on the local catchment. But we won't be looking at the neighbouring farmers that are also contributing to the local catchment.
And there's some similar questions about potentially working with other agencies involved in the biodiversity, nature and habitat area.
Teagasc will be happy to work with other agencies and to work with them as partners on the Signpost program. So again, as I said on my final slide, if anybody wants to talk with me afterwards, I'm sure my email address is available on the Teagasc website. So I'm happy to talk to anybody afterwards about that. I was very interested yesterday. We had a meeting with a number of the EIP projects and project leaders, should I say. I think there's great potential there on some of the EIP projects in relation to biodiversity and the types of scorecards that are being used. So look, Teagasc is happy to work with other agencies through the Signpost program. And as I said, we see this as a whole of industry approach to reducing, principally to reduce emissions, but ultimately to farm more sustainably, which will also benefit water quality, biodiversity, and economic sustainability.
A fairly specific question, but it's cropped up 2 or 3 times now, is will you be working with the equine industry and equine farmers in the program?
Yeah, we can. If that person wants to contact me afterwards, I'm happy to talk to them. The Signpost program is a whole of industry, a whole of sector approach. So we will work with all sectors, and I'm happy to talk to anybody after the call. Look, at the moment we're probably focusing on the dairy, the beef, the livestock sector, dairy, beef, and sheep, I guess. But it is our ambition to engage with all sectors. But there's only so many hours in the day, so we're trying to get the livestock sectors lined up at first, and then we'll engage with other sectors.
We have, over the next number of years, if I'm a farmer, I'm looking at all of these different policies and ambitions for the sector coming down the tracks. How do you see, or where do you see the role of industry there in supporting farmers through this change? Because, there are going to be a lot of things for farmers to contend with over the next number of years. Do you have a view on that?
Okay, so I suppose I'll start by saying that we can anticipate a lot of change, Mark. So, to expect that an organization like Teagasc or industry can come out and say, if you do this, everything will be sorted, is probably a wrong premise to start on. So, in the first instance, I think as producers, we have to accept that the future is going to involve change, right? So that's a starting point. And then in terms of industry, I suppose what I would look to industry for, and what industry are very good at doing and have done, in my opinion, very well. But I'm looking at from the dairy point of view, and that's been my experience. So we look to industry to send very clear signals to producers, and to send those clear signals well in advance, so farmers can plan their plan for the future. So that if there is going to be a change in regulations around, for example, antibiotic usage, and with a change coming in January of next year, well, that change has been signaled for 3 or 4 years now at this stage, and Teagasc has certainly been talking about that change and promoting the technologies and the changes that are required in advance of that piece of legislation coming into existence. So, what industry can do, I guess, is send very clear signals. And I suppose the other thing that I'd look to industry to do, and particularly in the area of greenhouse gas emissions, there are technologies that can reduce emissions. And then there are technologies that look like they can reduce emissions but don't, or are not recognized for reducing emissions. And what we want to avoid is confusing the message or muddying the waters by promoting products and technologies that appear to help but don't actually help at all. So we want to be sure that we're providing sound advice backed up by science to farmers, and that's where Teagasc can come in. We're a science-based organization. We can validate the research. We can provide independent advice, and we can support the industry. We can help the industry to make decisions around products and technologies that are already emerging, and will undoubtedly more of them will emerge in the coming years. And we want to be sure that if farmers use a technology, that it's going to be of benefit to the farmer, of benefit to the industry, and of benefit to Ireland.
Tom, just a quick question. It's just saying key is the communication of Signpost KPIs to farmers and stakeholders. Do we need a national education and training program to back this up?
Absolutely, Pat. It's high on my agenda. There is. I'm very much aware of it over the last not just in the last number of months since I moved into this role, but in the last number of years. There is, in my opinion, there is a knowledge gap out there around climate change and the role that farming plays in climate, and the role that farming can play in mitigating climate change. So there is a knowledge gap, and I think we have to work together to try and fill that knowledge gap. And in the first instance, it's a priority for me to work with the signpost farmers to ensure that all of the signpost farmers are very comfortable talking about climate and talking about climate change and talking more importantly about climate action. So I want to move beyond the situation where the farmer has switched to using protected urea and low emission slurry spreading and has reduced chemical fertilizer nitrogen, all the right things to do. But the farmer doesn't really understand why he or she is doing that. And that's a very important link for me, that people and farmers, we all understand that our individual decisions are having an impact on climate. So that's an important part for me, and absolutely there's a need for an education around that and around a lot of other issues relating to climate as well.
Okay, Tom, thank you very much. Huge amount of positivity and encouragement, and wishing you the best of luck with the program. So from all of the Signpost webinar team, we want to wish you luck with the program as well, and we hope to maybe get regular progress updates from you as time goes on. So once again, congratulations on getting the program to this point, and we'll keep in touch with you over the next months and years. Just to let everybody know that next week we'll be speaking to Paul Wagstaff from Self-Help Africa. So we're taking a slight detour and just looking at the impact of climate change on smallholder food production in the tropics, and just to get a view of what's happening in other jurisdictions. I think it's useful exercise to do that. So we'll be joined by Paul Wagstaff from Self-Help Africa. Just a reminder to people, the Environment Edge is the name of the podcast that has been launched today. So if you want to look that up on your podcast platform, Environment Edge, just put that in and it should pop up for you. And so that's really it. Thank you, Pat, for all of your help with the questions. And again, Tom, thanks again for excellent presentation. And we look forward to seeing everybody again next week. I hope you possibly hear the heavy rain in the background here. It's coming down very hard. So your maps are coming through, Tom. Certainly in the west anyway. Okay, God bless, and we will talk to you next week. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mark.